if Australia and the world don't get to net zero by before 2050, there's a very good chance we're going to transgress the Paris climate goals. And that is the well below 2 and 1.5. Already we're sitting at about 1.1. And here in Australia, we know what this means. The massive bushfires, half of the Great Barrier Reef is dead. Very heavy rainfall events now, flooding in Townsville, more coastal erosion, extreme heat. For one day last year, Penrith was the hottest place on the planet. We know what this is like, and we know that it's climate change that is driving this, and that's only at 1.1. The science is pretty clear that these risks and impacts do not scale linearly. They're going to be more than 0.4 of a degree worse at 1.5. 1.5 is probably manageable, but that's a tough world. A 2-degree world is almost unimaginable, in my view. So that's what's at risk. In fact, the sort of the future of our children and grandchildren is really at risk here. And I think we must do everything we can to secure that future.
There was a lot of pressure on Australia to commit to net zero by 2050. The Conservative government has done that now. They have gone and said that they do want to achieve that. Does this current plan have the ability to make it?
I don't think so. Because there's still too much emphasis on fossil fuels and there's too much emphasis on technologies that don't exist yet. The classic one there is so-called carbon capture and storage, CCS, which plays a major role in the government's plan. That technology has been around in principle for at least 20 years, closer to 30 years, and it's nowhere near being technologically or commercially viable yet, even after that long period of trial and research. It's already been passed up. Far, far cheaper to go renewable than it is to stick with fossil fuels, try to capture the emissions, try to condense them, try to pipe them down into a disused oil well or something and cap it. That's hideously expensive and technologically difficult. It's absolutely clear that the way forward is with renewables and electric vehicles and so on. So that technology is a technology of the past, the CCS, and it's never worked.
How do you think that plan is going to go down at this international meeting?
I think very poorly, because there isn't much in it that's actually new. Net zero by 2050, over 100 countries have pledged that. And in the lead up to Glasgow, many countries now are quite appropriately focusing more on the near term. They're focusing on what's going to happen between now and 2030. The science behind this is absolutely clear that to have any chance of stabilizing the climate within the Paris goals, that is well below 2, aiming for 1.5, we have to have really large emission reductions by 2030. So I suspect that's what a lot of the focus of Glasgow is going to be. And in that regard, our plan, if you can call it a plan, is an abject failure. We have not increased our rather inadequate 2030 target. And I think that will be a strong topic of discussion at Glasgow.
Yeah, let's go to that, because the government's projections for what it will achieve in the midterm does show 35% rather than the old percentage that it's committed to. And it's tried to sort of strengthen, it seems, the language it plans to go with, even though it still won't call it an ambition, but it is strengthening the language. Will that change things? Will that be seen as making a move in the right direction?
No, I don't think so, because basically what he's relying on is subnational jurisdictions to carry the load. That is states and territories and so on, which they have been doing quite well. But it's clear that at Glasgow, this is a meeting of the parties being national governments, and the focus is on what a national government is doing, bearing in mind, of course, that it can build on what subnational jurisdictions are doing, but it must have a national plan, it must have a national ambition, and it must have a national target. So our national target is still a 26 to 28% emission reduction on 2005 levels. Now, we're going to go past that almost surely, but not because of the national government. In fact, in spite of the national government. And I think that's going to be made clear at Glasgow. And I think we're going to have some pretty rough questioning, and we're going to get a rough ride, I suspect, there.
In terms of the future technological advances and breakthroughs that this plan relies on, I know there's been criticism about the way the plan will be driven by new technology. What do you make of that? Because the government says, and I've grilled them on this, that it's inevitable if you look at the human trajectory that we will make these advances. So what's the criticism there, and why do we know that the UN is unhappy with this?
Well, again, up till 2030, to get those advances from technology, you actually have to have policies in place and incentives that actually speed up the technological development. If we're going to get to 50% reduction by 2030, we actually have to ramp up what we're doing. Just leaving it to the natural processes of technology is not going to get us there. There are many, many scenarios that have been done by other countries, by private sector groups and so on, saying that we need policy frameworks, we need incentives if we're going to get there. It's clear that the technologies are there, but that is renewable technologies, solar, wind, electrification of transport, and so on. But the rate at which they're being picked up in Australia is not sufficient for us to meet an ambitious 2030 target. That requires incentives and policy frameworks.
The minister responsible, Angus Taylor, has declared he'll use that major climate summit in Glasgow to promote Australia as a good place to invest in fossil fuel projects. What's your analysis of this?
Well, to meet an ambitious 2030 target, and indeed to meet the Paris goals, we cannot have any new fossil fuel developments anywhere. In fact, we have to phase out the existing fossil fuel developments here and around the world. The science is really clear when you look at a so-called carbon budget that this has to happen. So on one hand, to say we're going to use technology and we're going to meet these targets, and on the other hand, promote new fossil fuel developments is totally inconsistent. And the rest of the world will see through that immediately. That if we don't take steps to stop any new fossil fuel developments and have a phase out of the existing ones over the next 20 years, it's clear that we are not serious about really doing our fair share on the climate change challenge.